Good morning, everyone. Nice to see the chairs about filled again this morning. This is our second coffee with the legislators. I'm Michael Held, and I will moderate today. These are organized by the Governmental Affairs Committee of the Huron Chamber and Visitors Bureau. Refreshments are provided by AARP of South Dakota and the South Dakota Farmers Union. We are glad to have all three of our legislators here again this morning for this 1 hour forum. I would ask you to check your cell phones and please turn them off or put them on silent so we don't interrupt our meeting this morning. Would like to recognize the Huron Plainsman, Performance Radio. Remind you that you can see this, you can view this on the YouTube channel under Huron, South Dakota. Would also like to recognize members of the Governmental Affairs Committee that are in the audience. If they just raise their hands so that people can see who they are, and thank them for their committee work. And also Lori Shelton, who will keep time here, President and CEO of the Huron Chamber and Visitors Bureau. We will take 3 minutes for opening statements, then we will get to your questions. If you have a question that you'd like to ask verbally, please come to the podium and identify yourself and where you live. Mr. Hanson has cards and pens. If you'd rather write your question down, we can take your question that way also. Then at the end of the hour, we will give each legislator 2 minutes for closing. With that, we will begin with opening statements, and our first report will come from Representative Lynn Schneider. Lynn?
All right, good morning, and thank you, Mike, and my thanks to the Chamber Governmental Affairs Committee, and thank you all for coming out this morning. Regardless of whatever your perspective is on any particular issue, we welcome all the input we can get, and we've been getting a lot in the last couple of weeks on certain items. So hopefully we got plenty to talk about this morning. Things are really winding up now. In the coming week, next week, we will have the most latest financial information that we can have available to us through the end of January as the people that set the homework on all the budget with the appropriations, everything, work on that. And so we'll have some extended meetings to try to start putting our priorities together of is there more money for this, is there more money for that? And it's just always interesting to me, especially these last 2 years that I've been here in Pierre, which was obviously my first foray out there, that we have all this money and it's still not enough. It's still not enough. There's a lot of really good things that are still on the to-do list that we would love to do. And some things we've made some good impact, and some things we still have homework to do. Maybe some things will have to wait another year or whatever, but it does come down to priorities. I thought I would just comment on one particular bill that's probably not of that much interest to you in the room here unless you're a pharmacist or maybe a pharmacist tech. But we had a bill regarding that come through our House Commerce and Energy Committee this week. And our chair of that committee was sponsoring the bill. And our vice chair, who normally would have been there, was actually out with COVID, although he was doing fine, and he was back last Thursday. And so I was called upon to chair that part of the meeting. And we had moved the meeting to a larger room than we normally have, and it still wasn't nearly large enough. But it all went well for at least the proponents of the bill. And in the end, our committee approved that unanimously. This was one that involved an entity called PBM, Pharmacy Benefit Managers, and they're like a middleman between the drug manufacturers and the pharmacists. And the pharmacists feel like they're being squeezed because they don't get much negotiating power with this pharmacy benefit manager who's kind of like a gatekeeper. So this was an effort to try to put more transparency into the process so that the pharmacists would know better what the fine print of their contracts they sign. Arguments were that, there's more and more pharmacies going out of business. There's like 20 of them that have Pharmacists no longer exist since 2018. You know, we had one, Northside Pharmacy, like Fair City Foods, for example, in our town. And so unless you're an affiliate of PBM, why, you might get a little better deal. So anyway, we passed that out, and so it was a interesting discussion, but everybody held their cool. So with that, I'll call it good for now.
Thank you, Representative Snyder. Next, we will go to Senator David Will. David?
Thank you. Thank you all again for being here and sharing this time with us. As I said, there's always a lot going on this time of year. Bill's living, Bill's dying, and it's just kind of it's always right in the middle here, kind of an exciting time before we get into the real appropriations discussions that'll start more in earnest this next week. Get a lot of policy discussions happening now. Something that I've been working on is an elections bill on post-election audits. That passed State Affairs this last week. We all know that elections have been top of mind for a lot of people lately. I'm definitely an advocate for our county auditors, and I know they do a good job. I believe our elections are safe and secure, but there's some best practices we can take from other places and help make sure people are confident in our election results. And so one of them is doing a post-election audit, and that is something that most states do. We're one of only about 3 or 4 states that don't have a process. So I work with auditors to help put together a process to do that. So it's a good best practice to adopt for South Dakota, and I'm happy to be a part of that so we can feel good about making sure that we have safe, secure elections in South Dakota. I already know they are. I've worked with our auditor, Jill, before up there on election day, helping count ballots myself, worked on recounts myself, and I know that we have a good system. Our machines count them correctly, but this will help give people a little extra boost of confidence to make sure that there's nothing going wrong in our election system. So that's one thing I've been working on recently, and we'll continue to work on that in the next few weeks.
Thank you, David. Representative Chase.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all here today. As I look across the room, I see county, I see education, I see healthcare, I see a lot of different issues that we could be talking about this morning. So should be an interesting coffee this morning. I was invited to go to Watertown this weekend, or the last hour, would have been between 8 and 9, to attend their coffee with the legislators, and they do that in conjunction with their winter farm show. And they actually put the legislators inside the sheep pen in the sawdust, and that's where they have their legislative coffee. And Representative Bartle says at 9 o'clock the sheep are ready to come in and be displayed and showed, and he says the gavel goes down at 9 and they're all out of there. So they're just completing their legislative coffee in Watertown. So it's nice to have a nice, bright, clean facility here to have this discussion in this morning. So I'm going to leave time for questions, but I do want to tell you about something that we did that was unique in my 7 years in the legislature this year. We reached the halfway point on Tuesday, and we wanted to do something special in the House, and something that we hadn't done before, and we have some talented people in the House of Representatives musically. And so Stephanie Sauter volunteered to play the piano, and Representative Schnorma and Representative Lems decided to kind of be the ones to sing God Bless America. And they did, and we all sounded in at the end of session that day. But when we started the day, we sang the national anthem. And Representative Schnorma led us. And if you ever have a chance to go back and listen to that, we sounded pretty darn good. And, you know, that was probably as moving of an experience as I've had in the chamber, because we sang it out, and then as we got just a few words into the song, you could hear the gallery join in. And if you were there that day, that was pretty moving. And so it's nice to see that sometimes we basically lighten it up a little bit, but do something else rather than yell at each other or debate one way or the other. But that was a moving experience for me, and that's something I'll remember for a long, long time. So free up the time, allow you to ask questions. Glad to see everybody here this morning.
I want to ask you a question. Was that the day you had bagpipes on the floor?
Yeah, we had a legislator from Brandon that actually played the bagpipes, and so We had a bagpipe march down through the center of the chamber, and he played a tune, and so something that the Senate will just never be able to do.
That's for sure, because we're sitting on the Senate floor, almost we hear bagpipes coming out of the gallery. It's like, what is going on over there? So,
Thank you, Roger. So we are ready for your questions. You can either come to the podium and ask a question, or you can get a card from Mr. Henson and write it down and send it up that way. I would remind you that we are here to hear from the legislators. So I would ask you that we are going to limit the amount of speechifying from the podium and hear what the legislators have to say about the topics. And Cliff, I believe you got up first, so we're going to start with you.
Last time I spoke in front of this many people, I was saying I do. Wow. Okay, I'm pleased that both the House and the Senate did pass the HB 1080 regarding the so-called gender affirming care and limiting that. What I'm curious about is this got shot down 3 years ago in the Senate committee, and so it never got to a full vote. But I doubt I doubt then it would have passed the Senate then. This time they both passed in both houses handily. What's different this time? Because I can't imagine that the NCAA is going to allow us to have tournaments here with that legislation. I can't. And I quit. I was on the board of the South Dakota Retailers, and I quit after I was off the board, but I was still a member because they supported this for the economic reasons, and I couldn't believe it. So I'm wondering what's different this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to start?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Hate this bill. Absolutely hate this bill. The reason why it's different this time, Cliff, is the title. An act to prohibit certain medical and surgical interventions on minor patients. How can you vote against that? It reminds me of a comment that I made last year, that it reminds me of the individual that swallowed an ice cube, and 3 days later they were still concerned because they hadn't passed it. That's basically what this bill does, is that I don't think it's happening in South Dakota, and I was frustrated that the bill came back. But I voted for it this time because of the title. And I guess my feelings changed on it, that there shouldn't be surgical procedures and drugs intervening on youth under the age of 18. We don't let them vote until they're 18. We don't let them drive till they're almost 14, 16. We don't let them smoke cigarettes. We shouldn't allow them to alter their sex until they're 18 to make the decision a little bit later in life. So I voted for it. I know it passed through the Senate the other day. It's headed to the governor's desk. I don't think there's any doubt that she'll sign it and it'll become law. So other than that, I don't have a lot to say about it. I just feel that it was an issue that was brought up, and I don't really know that it's an issue in South Dakota, but I couldn't vote against the title.
Can I say one thing though? Not to argue, but Sanford has done these altering drugs and surgeries for many years, and to compete with Mayo. So we do have it in South Dakota.
Who would like to go next here? Go ahead, Lynn.
Well, thank you. Couple thoughts. One, it's easy for me to say, well, the direct question was what changed from 3 years ago. I wasn't there 3 years ago, so I'm glad Representative Chase went first. So I don't know that history. I didn't check that out. But although I voted for the bill too, and I honestly believe that was the right vote to make, certainly for me, hopefully for our district. But to me, in a perfect world, those are not the kind of bills that need to come before our legislature, because that, I don't believe, is what our government was created for, is to decide things like that. To me, I'm more from the perspective of, well, having said that, this is where our culture is today. And so it's like, it's not surprising that we're seeing more of that kind of topic in front of the legislature. And so if it's gonna come there, well then I'm gonna make the best informed decision I can. Probably won't be the end of it. The only other thing that I'm aware of, some of the testimony that came out, and I saw the sheets on it, fact sheets, that, and it wasn't carried anywhere in media, is that countries like Sweden have done this procedures for decades. And they stopped a little over a year ago, in 2021. They came to the conclusion of all their study was that it was not accomplishing what it was intended to do. There weren't less suicides, there weren't less this, that, negative effects, but you don't hear that. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I too wasn't there last time it was up. My understanding is the bill was written a little differently. It was narrowed down a little more, to be a little more focused. And what it does, this was for everybody, every legislator. This is one of the toughest votes we take. To me, there's good parts in the bill, and there's not so good parts in the bill. And when you're a legislator, you don't always get the option to, you get what you have to vote what's in front of you, and you have to make hard decisions. So, it was clear this thing was going to pass. I mean, there's pretty wide consensus about not allowing surgical intervention until you're 18. My understanding, the testimony I had heard, was that it's not, the surgeries aren't being done. There's hormone treatments that could be being done.
Thank you.
And puberty blockers, but we had to deal with that. I will tell you though, I think there's a high likelihood this bill is going to get enjoined by federal court. There was a federal court in Arkansas that put an injunction on it that was already upheld by a panel of the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, which governs South Dakota. It's a preliminary injunction. I won't get into the legalities of that, but there's still going to be some legal fights going on over this. But given our federal judiciary, which definitely it's all appointed by Democrats, there's a good chance. So just for those people who are following that particular issue, just know that the next fight on that will be in the courts.
Thank you. Yes, come to the podium, please.
Bill Davis, Huron. Medicaid expansion. In the last election, about 82% of our population voted for Medicaid expansion with no limitations. But yet 2 weeks ago, the House of Representatives passed a bill with a limitation. Question to you folks, why? Senator Wheeler, when it comes to the Senate, think of how the voters voted. Thank you.
Let's start over here on the House, since you've handled that issue. Who would?
Bill Davis, you
Go ahead.
talking the resolution 5004?
I'm not sure what the number is, but it was Medicaid expansion bill, and you put a limitation on it about earnings.
That was the, yeah, let me pull that up real quick. That pertains to, if you're on Medicaid, if you're receiving Medicaid benefits, if you're able-bodied to work, you must perform certain hours of working in order to obtain Medicaid benefits.
But Medicaid benefits, sometimes people, this bill was to raise the amount that we can give the people based on their earnings, okay? And then some people are getting Medicaid, are getting supplements otherwise, and they're not able to work.
Okay, we're gonna let the legislators address the question, please.
Pulling it up right now.
Okay.
Well, while he's pulling that up, I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about HJR, House Joint Resolution 5004.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what it would do is, if passed, it would put back on the election ballot for next November, well, a year from November, for the next general election, an amendment that would allow the legislature to impose a work requirement. And so this is the Medicaid law currently, states can get waivers, and it's definitely political. You know, we can get a waiver when President Trump was president, and you're not gonna get a waiver with President Biden being president. And so with the current state of the Medicaid expansion that was passed by the voters, yes, over, it was a good, pretty good margin in favor of expansion. So it's a question of a tweak, you know, would the citizenry like to allow our legislature and our state to request those waivers when we can? And so, my intent is to support the resolution only because it's gonna allow the citizens again to ask that question, vote on that question. Should we allow work requirements? Again, it's not an imposition, it's a request, it's authorization for the state to request that waiver from the federal government. So it's complicated, but we cannot do those work requirement waivers right now with the current constitutional amendment that was passed this last time. So it's gonna put it in the hands of the people to make that decision.
Going right along with that, exactly what Senator Wheeler said is that when Medicaid expansion went in, it was under a constitutional amendment. The only way that that can be changed is by the vote of the people to change it one way or the other. So that this one joint resolution authorizes that to go on the ballot for the vote of the people to be able to determine. And let me just read from the first paragraph. Beginning July 1, 2023, the state shall provide Medicaid benefits to any person over 18 and under 65 whose income is below 133% of the federal poverty level. 5% of the federal poverty level is applicable family size and authorized by the federal government as of January 1, 2021. So basically, we're faced with a workforce issue in South Dakota, and our thought was, let's refer this to the vote of the people to determine whether they feel if you're gonna get Medicaid benefits, and if you're able-bodied to work, you should be able to go out and provide, you know, a useful value to society and provide work, and that you're not just abusing the system one way or the other. But again, you, the people, will have a chance to vote. If we get this resolution passed, it'll be on the ballot in the fall election of 2024.
Yeah, not too much more here to add, but it is a joint resolution, which means it's not a bill, it's not gonna be law. It's the decision to agree that let's put this on the ballot and have the people decide if they wanna further modify the Medicaid expansion constitutional amendment change that was just approved. And that change would be that these able-bodied people, which is gonna have to be defined, would have a work requirement. Now, people see that on the ballot and they don't approve it, and that's the end of that. And then there was a whole lot of other discussion about, well, how does this really work in other states? Is it really working? Is it not working? And you have all kinds of debates on both sides of the state tried it and weren't happy with all the red tape to try to figure out who's able-bodied and who isn't. And other states maybe have made it work. So that's essentially what it is. It's not a law, it's just an opportunity for the people to decide that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes, sir. Please come to the podium.
John McNally from Huron. And something I'm wondering about, you know, the main stem dams were built basically for three reasons. Number one, electricity, which we all know about, some irrigation, and also controlling flooding. And this was all, you know, under the auspices of the Corps of Engineers. I think we know the last few times that our experience has been the Corps of Engineers hasn't done a very good job on controlling flooding, especially for the people of Iowa, Nebraska, and Missouri. And of course, we get involved in it because we have the majority of the main stem dams trying to hold this back. They had had experts come to them, speak to them about an issue that was coming down the pike at them. They knew about the issue, and they said, thank you very much. And it seemed they didn't do anything. And after the last really large flooding situation that they had, there was very public, very public hearings in Washington, D.C. about this. People held their hands, you know, people did this, people did that, and it's done. Well, according to reports I've been hearing, started to hear it on TV, the headwaters of the Missouri and the Yellowstone have probably the highest snowpack in history this year. It's dry down here, but it's coming. Is the legislature in touch with the other states that are going to be affected by this, and also with the Corps of Engineers? Is there anybody looking at this? And we're talking 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and here it comes. And this could be a very serious thing. Once again, has the legislature maybe talked with people within the administration to see if they're talking with the people from Nebraska and Iowa and Missouri, and for that matter, North Dakota and Montana, to see what can be done? How can we can't stop it, but can we mitigate it? Just wondering if there's been any interest of it being brought up.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thank you, John. Personally, I have not been reading the articles about how much that snowpack is out in the Rockies and so forth. So on the other hand, I haven't heard anything across the legislature, my ears, maybe my counterparts have. But, yeah, I think we all remember the devastation that the Missouri couldn't handle 10 years ago or so, and where was the Corps, et cetera, and so forth. If there is any merit right now, the first thought comes to my mind is, well, right now, Hawaii is a lot lower than it was. It's got some more holding capacity than it did at that time, but I don't know. I'd say your point needs to be checked out seriously.
To answer your question, John, no, we haven't had any discussion on that. We've been busy working on budgets and everything else, but, good point to bring up, and we'll touch some bases and see what's being discussed. Like, Representative Schneider said, we see the river every day, and, we know that there's capacity downstream, because last year it was still dry, and, you know, they were having problems on the Mississippi River, running barges and everything along that line, so there's an opportunity to get that water flowing, as long as we know that we replenish the stock later on this spring. We know that it's gonna warm up, it's coming, so we'll visit about it.
If I might add something, the Missouri isn't the only river that's feeding, the Mississippi, the Ohio, and the Minnesota rivers, in which the Ohio River Valley has just been inundated, and the snow that they have gotten, there is gonna be a huge melt there, and that will create a bottleneck.
Okay,
At some
I
point.
think you've made your point, sir. Senator Willer?
Concur with what they said. This is primarily a federal Corps of Engineers question. They're the ones that control the dams. And you're the first person that's brought up to me. And so I agree that it hasn't been a discussion before. However, worth at least having some discussion as to what, if anything, legislature or the state can do about it. But ultimately, it's a federal control.
Do we have another question? Come forward, ma'am.
I had a question about the adult daycares and where you guys stand. There was, I believe.
Please tell us your name
My
and
name
where
is
you live.
Ashley King and Reese. I live in Huron. I'm your Government Relations Committee Chair for South Dakota Nurse Association. And we're looking at the decrease of adult daycare centers. At its peak, we had like 40 to 50, and throughout the state now we're down to 3. And I think it is actually, looking at it up right now, making appropriation, HB 1078, to make an appropriation to the Department of Human Services for the development and expansion of adult daycare service programs to declare an emergency. I wanted to see what you guys thought about it and where we were at and how Huron can participate in expanding this. We need some help. That's it.
Thank you. I would suggest we start over here in the House and tell us where the bill is or where it's at.
HB 1078 has been referred to a Joint Committee on Appropriations. It was first held in, the committee meeting was held in Health and Human Services. Came out of there, passed on a 13-0 vote. So it tells us that there's pretty good support for this to be moving forward. And so the Joint Appropriations Committee is going to be very busy over the next 2 weeks. There has been a lot of bills referred to them from policy committees on things, moving things forward. And, you know, as we talk about nursing homes, as we talk about adult health care, adult daycare, that's important that we have those services available. So if it's been that strong coming out of health and human services, I think it's got a good chance of coming out of joint appropriations, and we'll move it forward.
I would just add, if I look at it here, there's specifically $5 million allocated to expand and further development of our adult daycare services. So that's the number that appropriations is dealing with. So as I think of that in nursing homes and so forth, like Representative Chase brought up, the other thing that is being talked about, but really certainly a money item, is the healthcare providers of the nursing homes, assisted living. Like so many areas across the board, they're short-staffed, and to attract more people, a lot of it comes down to trying to get the pay scale where it needs to be. And so that's another front where appropriations is working on to see if we can go beyond what the governor has proposed in her budget, which ties into state employees and the education, school teachers and so forth. So that one, there's just gonna be a ton of work done on those kind of money items in the next week, 10 days.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just looking at the bill here. It's $5 million specifically for adults living with dementia. So it's really a memory care type of program. And it'll be in the mix there, absolutely. But to give you an idea, I mean, this is my appropriations worksheet here with all the different bills on appropriations that we're gonna page through in the next few weeks here. And it's, you know, not all of them are gonna pass. And so that's the kind of, this is definitely, it's on the list of things that we'll be in discussion with. As I said, you know, it's there's a lot of discussion about adult daycare, you know, the dementia, what are happening with nursing homes, that's gonna be a huge topic. You know, child daycare is actually also a huge topic also. And so, all I can tell you at this point, I mean, I personally haven't had a lot of discussion on this particular bill, because we're just gonna be getting into those discussions coming up here. But it'll definitely be in the mix as best I can tell you.
Thank you. Do we have another question from the audience? Anybody? Okay, we're gonna turn to the legislators and give each one of them 3 minutes to talk about some of the things, some of the bills that they have dealt with recently that either they've sponsored or in the committee they serve on, or have been on the House floor that they think, House or Senate floor, they think would be interesting. And David, if we could begin with you, is that, okay?
Why don't I go first? There's nothing
Okay,
really exciting
go ahead,
happening
Roger.
on the Senate side.
I should have asked for volunteers.
I want to tell you a little bit, I was selected as the chair of House Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. In our very first meeting, out of the 13 committee members, I went right on down the whole committee, and I asked every member to give us your name, where you're from, what your involvement has been in agriculture, how do you know, have you been a farmer, have you been involved with production agriculture, are you a sportsman, whatever the case might be. So we started way down on the end, and it started with people that had been affiliated with farming at one point. There was still landowners. Then we had 2 or 3 different farm producers, ag producers. We had Drew Peterson, John Sarda, J.D. Wangsness that has a farm and ranch. And then it came right on down. We got Marty Overweg that has a farm supply store, myself, and then we got to Caden Whitman, young gal from Sioux Falls, freshman legislator, never served in the legislature before, got assigned to our committee. And I'm guessing she's 30, 35, young gal, very nice gal. Her first comment is, never been on a farm, and I don't hunt. I've been assigned to this committee. And continued on down, we have other people who were farmers, dairymen, landowners, Representative Schneider, you know, with his background in production, ag, financing. But I always remembered thinking that, oh my God, this gal from Sioux Falls is gonna be a real challenge on this committee. And I'm telling you, she's been a breath of fresh air. And when we had House Bill 1029 and 1090 here 2-3 weeks ago, those dealt with zoning issues, confined animal feeding operations. We talked about ag nuisances, we talked about the dust and the noise and the dirt and the smell of agriculture. And she asked good questions. Why is this important? Why are we passing this legislation? Well, in the last week, we held a Leopold Award for conservation, and we had the Bean Family Ranch from Sisseton that came in and talked about, you know, grass preservation and restoring wetlands and being very economic, very sound for environmentalists and conservation minded. Then on Thursday, we had a bill dealing with anaerobic digesters on lagoons from dairy farms. And she came over to me after we got done with that committee meeting. She says, I had absolutely no idea what an anaerobic digester was. When I looked at the bill on Tuesday, she said, I did my homework. And this gal did her homework. She knew what the depth of most lagoons were. She knew how they were lined, how they captured the methane coming off of the lagoons. She had good questions. She did her homework. For somebody that was fresh out of Sioux Falls, she's learning. And I realized at that point, that's important to have that urban voice on an ag committee, because we need to make sure that people like that are informed, that they ask the questions, why is it important for us in Sioux Falls? And so that's been kind of the realization of, it's important to have, you know, a real good cross-section of people that serve on those committees, because I would think that everybody on that committee should know about agriculture and why hunting issues are important. She did the homework, she asked the hard questions. She's probably one of the better committee members that I have on that committee, and glad to have her.
Thank you. Who would like to volunteer to be next? David?
Sure. One issue I've been working on this session is juvenile justice issues. I served on the summer study last summer regarding our juvenile justice system and how we can improve it, make changes to it. Some of the bills that came out of that are gonna be more technical, hard to explain what their effects are, but it had to do with some community-based resources, community response teams that are available in the juvenile justice system, some reforms to an oversight council, and there's some, probably the more significant one is some debate over broadening out the authorization to send a child to the Department of Corrections. So, you know, the most severe thing that can happen in a juvenile justice system is a child can be taken out of their home and placed in the custody of the DOC, Department of Corrections. When Senate Bill 73 passed several years ago, the state tried to narrow that discretion down for judges to only people who were violent offenders or a lot of repeat issues, but for serious level felonies, and that's at the same time we closed Star Academy, and so we really changed our method of dealing with juvenile justice. And we've been hearing concerns about, that's pushing more issues into the school system, and so we've heard a lot from educators. So we're trying to find a way to help balance those issues that exist in juvenile justice and what's the right way to handle things. And it's never an easy discussion. It's hard to always know the right thing to do. But one thing we did do is we're working on a bill that would give a little more discretion to judges on those who have a lot of low level but like repeated. So if it's your third, fourth time in a year you're in front of the judge and things aren't going well, you're not committing serious stuff, but you're doing a lot of minor stuff and things aren't going well, whatever probation you've been on isn't working, you might need to take you out of your home. And there's something going on there. Maybe the services allowed in DOC might be better for you. And so there's something we've been working on there to help give a little more discretion to the judge on those severe repeat offenders. So that's something that's moving through the system right now that we'll continue to work on.
Thank you, Senator. Lynn?
I wanted to ask a show of hands, if you would. How many of you in your kitchen have your cooking stove that is either natural gas or propane. Can you raise your hand? There's a fair amount of it. Well, you know that's been in the news lately too, at the national level. Sure enough, in our Commerce Committee, next Monday, we're scheduled to hear a little short bill that would oppose any ban on natural gas or propane stoves in South Dakota, trying to preempt the federal government's move.
Jeez.
It's like, well, that's interesting, but you just stop and think again, it's like, it just almost feels like, to me, I don't know, maybe I'm way too practical, it's like, this is almost absurd. Why do we have to have a law for that purpose? I mean, I thought we tried to operate with what I call common sense. But, so I don't know where that will go Monday. I'm guessing maybe that might be part of the discussion. Well, absolutely, yeah, we should do that because we like to make our own decisions about stuff like that, you know? I do too. And then the other hand would probably be of, well, it's just too absurd. No, let's just send it to the 41st day. So that'd be kind of interesting, just kind of a nuanced area of a bill. We've had both in our 53 years of marriage, and I guess I've never asked my wife which one she prefers, but right now we have them electric ones. Anyway, the other one here I want to maybe just touch on a bit, and maybe a question will still come on it, and just within the last few days or whatever it is, there's a bill floating around about the state, I'll just call it dedicating money for vouchers for families for the private schools if they're attending their kids in a certified, accredited private school in South Dakota. And so the Appropriations Committee is going to be looking at that too. That one is interesting because there's around, if all the kids qualified for that, it'd be a number of about 8,500 kids in our state. And right now, our state aid education is right up against about $7,000 a kid. If you multiply that out, that's approaching a $60 million item by itself. And maybe because Iowa recently did that is why it's getting a little bit more attention here in South Dakota. So that's another priority item. Well, yes, I know, those families pay taxes too, like all of us do. But I think the big hurdle I will have certainly this year is, where are we gonna find the money for that? And look at how much work we still got to do with our public education system when it comes to paying our teachers and trying to get out of being 50th in the nation on it. So another interesting one to watch, but I'd be surprised if that really gains traction because it's such a big item in dollars for all the other things we're trying to figure out priorities.
Thank you. Do we have a question from the audience now? Yes, sir.
Ben Chase from Huron. I know that the House heard some debate and definitely had some lobbyists on the floor regarding HB 1133, eminent domain bill. Kind of curious, David, what you've had for folks talking to you about that, and just curious what your guys' thoughts are on that bill.
Thank you. Who wants to start?
I'll start on it. Basically, in Monday State Affairs, we had 6 different bills pertaining to the pipeline, eminent domain, futuristic utility request for, putting in pipelines, whether it's for gas, electricity, carbon, or any other utilities that go in. And so many of these bills were targeted towards the carbon pipeline projects that are being talked about right now. I think out of the 6 bills that we heard, 4 of them were deferred to the 41st day. Totally unreasonable as far as expectations that you'd have 90% of everybody signed on and approved before you could even bring it to an application. That's unreasonable. A lot of these eminent domain requests really put the hammer down on any future utility providers and the unintended consequences coming along with what that could do. We did pass out House Bill 1230, which I think is probably an okay bill. It deals with final offers on easement request, that if the two parties can't agree, they go to court. And if the court realizes that they were not treated equally, the party that is going to have to give the easement would get 20% more, and all of the legal fees would be reimbursed. I also brought up the question then, what happens if, say for example, the request is, or the court orders $100,000, but the request, the final offer was higher than that? The answer is, the individual would have to accept the 100,000, would have to accept the lower one. And that could happen in a lot of these cases. And I wanted, the people to be aware of that, especially want Senator Wheeler to be aware of that also, is that those numbers could fluctuate and people could end up being hoodwinked and actually take a lesser amount than what the final offer was. 1133 was the final bill, and that was basically defining, as carbon a commodity. And it's basically the last ditch effort to try to, put the kibosh to the plans for the two pipelines, both Navigator on the east side of the state and then Summit coming through this area. And I guess, it did pass out of the House on a 40-27 vote, I believe. And so it's headed to the Senate. They'll be hearing it over on their side. I still don't like the bill. I think that whenever you start changing eminent domain laws, you are going to affect a future problem or future project in a negative way. And so it's moving to the Senate. We'll let them debate it, discuss it, decide it from there.
Yeah, I too was in the House on the day of that bill and made that vote, which was one I didn't want to do very bad, but I tried to operate under the premise District 22 sent us out to Pier to do our job, not to ask for an excuse that day when the tough vote comes up. So I was there, and I voted the same way as my colleague Representative Chase did, that I didn't think that was the right bill. I also visited with a gentleman from northern Spring County who's pretty outspoken about it. I met him a time or two but didn't get to know him, but I wanted to visit with him about it and had a good conversation. And one of the things I was saying to him is, if you look at just our District 22 here, which primarily Beetle and then Spring, and a little sliver of Clark. And generally the emails and feedback and stuff that comes to me is I see Beetle County generally more okay with the process as we have it now for eminent domain, as relates to even this pipeline. But Spring County, maybe a long way from not so much even. And so it was gonna be tough either way. I think to me the problem specific with that bill is it was totally designed to try to squeeze this particular carbon pipeline bill. It was trying to center on the definition of a common carrier. And the argument was, we need this bill because this pipeline project doesn't fit a common carrier because the product that it's carrying, CO2, even though there's a lot of it in dry ice, the pop that we drink and everything, all this product right now is designed to go to a hole in the ground in North Dakota, never to be seen or used again. And that should be the end of it. And the commodities are what go through a pipeline, which is a raw material mostly that is a big scale, whether it's natural gas or oil or all that kind of stuff. And so I just felt that they needed to try a different approach. But it was all about trying to push property rights, which are very important, against, quote, the common good. And the argument was that this common good isn't broad enough. So that was kind of what we were struggling with. So the Senate now gets their crack at it.
Go ahead, David.
Thanks. So, when I opened my email up just this morning when I got here, I got about 3/4 of the first page here is all about 1133. So those are coming to my side. I'm chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, and that's where we're gonna be hearing these pipeline bills. So now it's in our hands. The carbon capture pipeline is important for the future of the ethanol industry and corn growers in South Dakota. The ethanol industry is gonna be changing. The competition to lower carbon scores of ethanol is gonna be an important part of that industry. And so if we have, there's the one that's coming up through Beetle and Spink County and going north to North Dakota is one that's joining in a lot of ethanol plants, including the one in Huron, including the one in Redfield. And they're gonna benefit from this pipeline. And there's one in Iowa that's kind of going south. It comes in a little bit of, I think, southern part of South Dakota.
It rate basically runs along the eastern side, so it's gonna catch the plants in Chancellor, Aurora, Roshold, Marion. There's another one, but one of the,
And that goes south.
I think it's Loomis down here, I think that's a Poet plant. All of the Poet plants are going to Navigator, all of the other individual or Glacial Lakes is going to Summit.
Yeah, and so if Iowa and Minnesota are doing this and we're not, then Iowa and Minnesota's ethanol plants are gonna be at a competitive advantage to ours. Because states out west, especially California, want lower carbon score ethanol. And so to lower your carbon score, you try and capture that carbon dioxide, and you put it in the ground. I mean, and so that's the whole point of doing this. And so corn farmers are in favor of this because they want to make sure that our ethanol industry in South Dakota is strong and continues to be strong. So I'm a supporter of our ethanol industry and our corn growers in South Dakota, and so my intent is to not support the bills that are coming through. It's in some ways they're changing the rules in the middle of the game, and these two industries have already invested millions of dollars in this project, and now they want the legislature to come around and stop it. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do for industry in South Dakota. Anyway, I guess that's where I'm at. If you want more information, you can ask me. I'm out of time.
Thank you, David. We have come to time for our closing comments from the three legislators. And we are going to begin with Representative Chase. Roger?
Thank you, Mike, and thanks again for everybody serving refreshments and the city for allowing us to have this room. It's certainly much better than a sheet pan with sawdust. So, appreciate the questions today, guys, and we're accessible. You can reach us most any time. We've had a lot of you come to the Capitol, come to Pier with your different organizations to service lunches or socials. We appreciate that. It's nice to hear from you as you come to Pier. And obviously, we all three have iPads. You can contact us, email us, communicate with us each and every day. So we have a lot of things happening out there right now. We invite you to be in contact with us, and we want to be your legislators and hear your views. And we may not always vote the way you want us to vote, but we only have two choices, folks. And sometimes we make people happy, sometimes we make people pretty frustrated and disappointed. But the next thing for us is really going to be starting to hone in on the budget and allocating where the funds go. And we'll be working on that hard, and we'll do what's best. I know Senate Bill 18 is coming up on Monday. That deals with the increased funding for the DEX project. We'll be testifying in favor of that. There's groups coming out to testify in favor of that. I think that's fairly safe, but we're going to make sure that we talk about the importance of the DEX project for this community, what it means for the state fair, and hopefully solidify that funding for that particular project. Love you coming out. Be in touch. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you, and we'll go to Senator Wheeler. David?
Thank you. With the, we're supposed to be, I think, getting the revenue estimates this week. And that's kind of what everything hinges on in terms of the budget. And so you're really gonna see next week and the week after is when the budget talks, and then we're gonna start talking about, tax cuts and needs for, increased, services, inflation, whether it's, childcare providers, youth care providers, or community service providers, Medicaid, enrollees, you have, nursing homes, I mean, all these big ticket items, that will be in the conversation, and so, are we gonna do 5%, or some talk about, some support for a 6% instead of the recommended 5%. But there's a lot of moving parts. There's what's happening in the economy, inflation, there's, if we have enough excess ongoing money, do we return some through a tax cut? Definitely need some support for that, but we wanna make sure we're adequately funding services in time of increased inflation, and so many moving parts, and trying to, find the right spot, to land is gonna be, definitely a good conversation we'll be having, so, please reach out with your, thoughts and opinions on that, and tell us where we should land on that. That helps us in our decision making, so, thank you.
Thank you, and Representative Schneider.
Thank you, and I too, again, thank you all for coming out today, and appreciate the interest you have in what goes on in the legislature, and giving us your input, and giving us your questions, whatever they are. Appreciate that. Representative Chase mentioned about many groups coming out to the legislature, school groups and different associations, et cetera, and so forth, corn growers, soybeans, what have you, healthcare, and so many times those groups, they're almost flooding us with all kinds of goodies and food and whatnot, and otherwise we spend the bulk of our day sitting in different committee meetings, asking questions, listening to input, and so not to be asking for your personal sympathy here, but it's kind of hard on the body. And I was kind of nervous this week because yesterday I had a coincidental follow-up with my doc for my labs, and it's like, oh, this is the wrong time for that. But I showed up, and they did it, and the labs were in good shape, so I must be disciplining myself not too bad on that. But we got 4 more weeks to go, too. But yeah, otherwise, the next probes bill will be certainly very important to Huron in District 22, and but we still want to do what we need to do to make sure that we're heard and that doesn't get sidetracked. It should be in very good shape. And so beyond that, yeah, the big stuff now is mostly money, and it'll get all solved, and by the end of the session, we will have a budget that's put together, and we will not have any deficit in it, because that's what our Constitution requires. So, thank you.
Thank you. Let's show our appreciation for the service. Thank you for coming. Nice to see a full room again. And to those of you that asked questions, thank you for doing that and the way you did it. 3 announcements. The next chamber mixer is on Valentine's Day at Black Tie from 4:30 till 6. Also on Valentine's Day is the Huron Concert Association, the Travis Anderson Trio at the Huron High School at 7 o'clock. Our 3rd and final coffee will be in 2 weeks in this room at 9 o'clock on Saturday the 25th. Thank you for attending and have a great day.